do it. So I'm excited today to have Diana Woolis, Dr. Diana, with us. And I know, and that the conversation will be very, very useful, inspirational. And since we are only a few of us, I will not go into a round of introductions. I will just introduce the people who are present here so that, you know them, and I hope you will, others will join later. So I have with me Asim Latif, who is a colleague of mine at the INEE. He is the coordinator of distance education, and he collaborates and still collaborate with Diana on topics related to distance education in emergencies. I also have Sarah Kassab. I work with her. She's based in Lebanon. I work with her on a project for teacher professional development related to the quality holistic learning. And so me and Sarah, we worked with Diana before she got the decision to retire. So we'll hear about this a little bit later. And we also have Giovanna, who is, is it Giovanna or Giovanna? How do you pronounce it? You say Giovanna, right?
No, it's Giovanna. It's Sanskrit. It's Giovanna, but the Spanish speaking always call me Giovanna. I'm okay.
Yeah, okay. So Giovanna is a colleague on the Community of Practice at the INEE, and she is co-moderating with me the channel about higher education. She is based in the US. And just to mention that this event is organized through this Community of Practice. So we are glad to invite guests who would be willing to answer any question, and we could encourage any one of you as members of INEE and of the Community of Practice to, let's say, to volunteer to be guests or to name others. So it's really an event that is open to everyone, and it's let's say a spontaneous event, and we don't have any scheduled let's say event where we go through assigned activities or presentations or whatever. So now I'm really glad to welcome Diana, and instead of presenting her, she's the guest of this event, I will ask her to present herself in her own words. So please, Diana, can you come in?
Well, first, thank you for the invitation to be here. And what I would say mostly about myself is, in a big picture point of view, my career has been dedicated to activism around equity. My early career was as a professional feminist. I was very much involved in women's rights and equal education for girls long before it became what it is now, which delights me. And have worked in education and for education in a whole range of ways, in policy, in research, in adult education, in nonprofit organizations, in government, and in research. So I have a broad picture, and also at the local level, the national level, the city level, and globally. So I have a view of the world regarding education. And let me just stop there. So, well, let me not stop there. So again, my deep commitment is to equity, access, and justice in education, and using education as a way to create or facilitate our ability to be at peace somewhere in the world at some point, and for economic mobility in particular. So those are that's sort of a very broad and non-specific. I mean, I can talk about jobs, but the thread that goes through them are the things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, this is great, Diana. Thank you. So you are giving us let's say you describe where you evolved and how you created your journey or followed your journey. I think you made a lot of decisions during this journey. It was not something that just coming to you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know how strong you are, so I would doubt that you were just accepting things. So I have so many questions to you, but I leave it to my colleagues to maybe have the say. Who would like to ask Diana? Yes, please.
I think I'll go with the first question, but I will, instead of going the beginning of your career, I think I'll go towards the end. With so much, I mean, this is one thing that, like for me, you have the potential to do so much, and you decided that you want to retire at this point. How did that, like, how were you able to take such a decision of retirement? And you have so much that, like, so much of a potential that you can give to the education system, and how does that make you feel?
Well, I look at you guys and I think, this is great. They're carrying the work. This was the point. So one way I'm able to do that is I have great faith in the people I've worked with, particularly in this last, most recent chapter. I mean, the talent of people in the field, educators, and the potential is so potent. And the moment for us as a field to move forward has really come, you know, as Sarah, you could say a little bit about the meetings in New York recently. So one thing that makes me able to do that is I feel like I needed to do a piece of work and get it over a threshold. So let me back up and say something about that. I did not know really anything about refugees or refugee education or that much about K-12. And when I was asked by the Carey Institute to start the Center for Learning and Practice, our CEO, Gareth Crawford, was in the humanitarian sector. So that was really his passion. And I said to him, they wanted to create something in education. I said, if we're going to do something, we need to join our passions. And his passion was humanitarian work. My passion was education and equity. And so what I said is, okay, so where is the white space? Where can we make a difference in the world in that area? And we came to, through a process, which you can read about because we've written about it, on teachers of refugees. And so from that came the Refugee Educator Academy. So to your question, Sarah, so what's the next thing? I have always found that it finds me in a certain way, and I know what my strengths are, and I also know what my weaknesses are. And there won't be, this isn't the end of this work. That's why I say I didn't really retire. I stepped down from that position. It's not the end of my work, it's the end of that job. And I also felt one of the reasons that I got involved globally in refugees is I'm very active also locally. I ran for office. I was chair of the board of our library and so forth. And I said, okay, if I'm going to work globally, then I need to work locally, because that's where you really understand the issues that happen in a community when you're trying to get the smallest thing done. You know, it's like a lot of personalities. You can have all the stuff and all the organizing and all the material and all the content, and then you walk into this classroom or the school board meeting, and everything is just like, it's about partnerships and relationships and collaboration, and that's your focus. So my hope is to answer your question. You can see that I can answer a question for a very long time. I make up my own questions while I'm talking, but there are the things that I'm going forward really is right now I'm focused on the sustainable learning framework. From my 40 years of work in all these different contexts, I've really come to consolidate, if you will, what I think are a set of core disciplines and principles that enable us to work effectively in and achieve our educational goals and impact. And so I'm really wanting to dig deeper into that. So I will be writing more about that. I have a website and a blog. I'm starting communities and conversations around that. So really, I'm just taking a little break for a couple of months. Sarah, did anything about that answer the question?
Yes, definitely. I think when you're speaking, like there's this passion and that like it glows in you, that it shows that education is your passion. I think he said something important about things will find their own way to me. And so as long as you're like following the process, or you're being part of the process, you will eventually be reached out, and you will attract things towards you.
You know, I always say I've worked with great teams, including the team I just had over my career. And a lot of things happen when you're working. And what I say to people, and even people who are ambitious in a way that is not to my taste, you know, they want to have a position rather than achieve a goal. I always say, just focus on doing the work. Just focus on the work, and the good work and the successful work brings the other things. You know, don't go after, you know, whatever committees or whatever. I mean, I'm not advising not to do that. I'm just saying the most important thing is to stay in your passion and do good work. And earlier in other projects I've done, I talked about passion and pain. People say, oh, why don't people get engaged? And it's because people don't get engaged because they don't have time. You know, so what engages people is either they have a passion about it or they are in great pain about it. And if you want to engage people, engage them where they are, not where you want them to be. This is what we were talking about before we started. I said, you will all come to the same place ultimately, but you need to stay with the pain and resolving a real problem or a passion that you feel like. My passion really is about equity and justice. That's my whole career. And when you do that, you know, I guess there's something to be said about being authentic. You know, it's like, be your authentic self. You know, it's like when, you know, as a younger, and I would say, going for a job interview, and people say, I would be asking, you know, what should I say? And you know, it's like, they would say, be yourself, you know, because if you don't like what they're saying, you're not going to like working with them. So being authentic, following your passion, and also in that, don't compromise on pushing for quality, you know, or like, and for the principles that you hold dear. So that's another question you didn't ask me. I'm on a roll.
Yeah, it's so great to listen to you, Diana. I don't know. I have a question, but I'll check if Asim or Giovanna. Yeah, please, Giovanna.
Thank you, Ula. So, Dr. Woolis, I'm just curious. You said you came, you know, you're a feminist. You were concerned about women and education. I would just like to know what sparked that particular interest. I can tell you my own story, but I'm just curious about yours.
Well, I would love to hear your story as well. I've always been a feminist and an activist. And I started being a university administrator when I was very young. I was 21 when I got my first leadership position at a university. And it was really focused on women And that was a time in the US for Title IX, which was about sports. And I had been a competitive athlete when I was younger. And also focusing on the Equal Rights Amendment, for women in the United States. So I ended up working in a university, and then I took a job in the State Department of Education. So now I was really in education. And from that point forward, I stayed more focused on education, if you will, and educational equity than feminist activities, but always equity is a part of the agenda. So that was the beginning of that trajectory. The other thing was when I was working in the Department of Education at the state level and watching the politics, the local politics, and how things were decided, the legislature and the governor and so forth, I made a decision, I don't know why actually or how, I had a master's in social work, to get a master's in education. I'm sorry, a doctorate in education. I already had it. And that sort of sealed it. And from then on, I continued to be in jobs that were educationally focused, but had an very important component for women. So just an example was that I was a vice president of a think tank, a research tank at Columbia, focused on substance abuse. And in the United States, there was the welfare reform, which required women it required people on welfare to work. It was a crazy racist law, but anyway, so it was projected that the people who would be most adversely affected by that would be substance abusing women. And so I was hired to create a national demonstration project on education and employment for women who were substance abusing. So there are always those things, but can you just say a few words about how you came to where you are?
Oh,
if that's
sure.
okay.
Yeah,
Am I allowed to do that?
I just want to press you on the issue of women and education first, but I mean, I'll tell you my own story. I come from an island, and a little island in the Indian Ocean, which was not that developed when we were growing up. So schools for girls were located essentially in the capital area and in just outside of the capital. So very little access for women to go to school. My father was very active in pushing for women's education. And but I always took it for granted that, I would be educated. I wasn't really thinking of the social context of women and education. But my father told me when I was about 16 that I should always work for making sure that women have access to education. I told him he was crazy. And I never followed that path. I became a lawyer. I looked at human rights more broadly. And then when I got married, settled here. And the issue of women and education has always come to me. When I taught political science, the few girls female students that I have in my class would not engage. They didn't have opinions. They didn't know how to, address the issues that I was teaching. And I was shocked by that. United States in the 2000 in Michigan, why aren't women into politics? Again, I take a lot of these things for granted. So I didn't understand how come in the United States, women did not engage with education in this same way. So it made me look at issues of women's position in society, in this country, in more broadly. And then you come across the equal pay. And now today we're dealing with the issue of abortion. So it's interesting how my generation on the one hand, we had certain rights. You know, we were already voting in my country, but then education institutions were located only in the capital. I come from a rural area, and I have a father who's pushing for educational institutions in the rural area, and that just exploded. Nowadays, you know, women are educated, there are in all sorts of positions, but it took activism to get there. And,
yeah, so
you know, so I'm just curious about why you know, how did it occur to you? How did that bell go off that, you know, women and education is an issue that is one should look at? The welfare point is excellent. I didn't think of that. You know, I'm not aware of that. So that is really one aspect of how welfare works.
well, you and I share a lot of common threads in that my undergraduate work was as a political scientist.
Right.
I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and chose not to do that route. And it was my father and my mother who were inspirational. They were both activists in the labor movement. And so I grew up on that and an expectation on the part of my family to do something to make the world better. That was implicit in our family life. So that was the beginning. And then, as I said, I forgot an important moment in my early career when I was at the university. The now being the National Organization for Women Legal Defense and Education Fund was starting a national project called the Project on Equal Education Rights. And I was hired to be a director of that project on equal education rights. And that was the beginning. And that was about getting girls into math and science in K-12. So that it's like, you know, going back to Sarah's question, it's like you get a job and you think you're going this way. And then this other thing happens and you're like, right, I'm going to do that. Makes sense to me, because as I was, you know, thinking I'm going into law, the thing is that there's a lot of things that a lot of ways you deal with law and policy without being a lawyer. And so, you know, that was another route. So it came into my head when I popped out and was born, you know, sort of the milieu of my family. And I actually remember my very first pay came, my first salary, if you will. I think I might have been maybe 7 years old. I can't remember. There were a lot of stories about these moments in my life, but we were, my father was engaged in a campaign, and I was stuffing envelopes. That was my job. I had to fold the paper and put it in the envelope. So everybody was a part of the work, you know, including the kids. And then back in those days, before electronic money, you'd get a little envelope when you got paid, you know, with money in it. And so I got my little envelope and got paid. And that was like the first time I think I got paid. But there's this expectation of doing things, and also of taking risks. Like, it's not okay to not do something because there's a risk involved, you know, and just understanding what those risks might be. You know, people get hurt, you know, there are things that happen when you are an activist, and not everybody has to be on the front line. And I was, you know, not one of the, I'll call like that element. But even, you know, as you all know, from all the countries we all come from, you can go to just a plain old American demonstration. Look, today where the hearings are coming, here's a perfect example. And, you know, and there's violence and unexpected and unanticipated consequences. And in each way, you know, sometimes it's not violence, sometimes it's getting fired. Sometimes it's not getting the promotion. Sometimes it's not, you know, there are so many ways in which politics plays out, you know, personally and professionally and globally. So I can't claim any great insight. I have friends who really were born in very traditional conservative families and have become activists and committed. And I'm not one of those. I was like prepackaged.
Thank you. Thank you very much for both of you for bringing this. So, Asim, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so just a quick question on the same topic. So I just wanted to know, in your opinion, the theory you studied in your master's and then in PhD program around feminism, equity, how much relevant was it to the everyday problems, worldwide? And in your experience, in practical terms, is there a gap? The theory needs to be updated. If there is a gap, or you think all the case studies and the academic side of these really big issues around equity and feminism, they are doing justice on what is happening on the ground, the real issues of women?
So that's a good question. So my dissertation was really on organizational learning, had nothing to do with feminism. And my case was the Department of Labor. And I was looking at the actual title of my dissertation was Learning and Change in Government. And I would say to people, it's not an oxymoron. So, moving governments is, as we all know, very difficult. So that was my focus. And at that point, a book had just come out called The Learning Organization by Peter Senge. And that was really what I was looking at. In fact, that was what I was measuring in this particular case. And so the sustainable learning framework, I would say its origins were back then when I was doing the dissertation. So for me, I know a lot of people do their dissertation and that's the end of that. I use my dissertation all the time. And, the things, Asim, you've heard me talk about in our working group, these are things that I was exploring 30 years ago. And I'll give you one example of that. But what I was really looking at is, how do we embed learning in organizations? Because learning to me is a management process. Like, if you're a manager, you should be a good learner and a good teacher. Good teachers, you have to be open to learning. And in my dissertation, one of the things that I was looking at, again, in the projecting into the future, at the end, when you have to ask the question, you have to pose a question based on your research. My question was, one of my questions was, if our conceptions of time and space change, what will learning look like? And everybody thought I was nuts. Like, what is she? I said, this has something to do with Einstein. This has something to do with, I can't explain it. I can't tell you. Like, when I was working on my dissertation, I woke up one morning and I said, this has to do with relativity. I don't know what, I know nothing about that. But I really felt, and it really was like, I woke up in the morning and I said, there's something about time and space. And here we are 30 years later, and COVID happens. And we start to begin, pre-COVID, those challenges were becoming more articulated and more clear and more defined. And now post-COVID, the question of time and space, you don't have, everybody understands that, so when do you have class? Where do you have class? What does it look like? What is space? What is a building? What's a schoolroom? Like, these are really, really very important questions right now. So my dissertation, again, I tend to be, people tell me half the time, nobody knows what I'm talking about because I don't unpack my thinking fully. But the idea is that there are, okay, now I'm really going off the path here, but when I was writing my dissertation at that time, I was calling it something called quantum learning. And what I was trying to convey, and I didn't even know then clearly what it is that I was trying to say, but what I understood, or what I was theorizing, if you will, that the world was moving more towards this quantum way of being. And we were able to see more smaller things because of our quantum capabilities, and that we began to understand that we weren't going to be able to do things predictably. We would have to do them probabilistically because we were moving into this quantum world. So that was another part of my theorization. And again, what has happened, if you look at learning and education over the 30 years or so since I wrote my dissertation, the units of learning have become smaller and smaller and smaller. So we have micro credentials and micro courses, and you can combine them in different ways, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and you have a different relationship to these units of learning. And it could be a unit. How many times do any of us go to YouTube when something breaks and we need to fix it? That's like nano learning, really, but it works. And you do go there and you learn, like, I don't know, how to fix the toilet or how to plant your geranium or whatever it is you're trying to do. So those things that I learned, and that's what I was focused on, these processes and the nature and the materiality of learning and education. If you think about the way I would describe it is, I was trying to come up with a new lens, a new microscope through which we could look at learning and education. And my focus, if you will, if I was looking in that microscope, I am looking specifically at the cells and the elements that foster equity and inclusion. So I was both like inventing the microscope and then trying to do something with what I was seeing. Does that make any sense?
Definitely. And I think technology, separating the teacher from time and space, it is going to be a great equalizer in terms of equity. And I hope that, especially in crisis context, more and more, equity we're able to build into our programs, because definitely that is the future.
Yes, and that's what I saw also when I left my career making, as vice president of this think tank. I seemed to follow this idea. I believe that technology was an answer, but like everything, it's a double-edged sword. It's also a divider. But in that last job I had when I was vice president, and we had done these very successful, very big projects. And my CEO at the time kept saying, who had worked for a president of the United States prior to this, he kept wanting these big projects. And I said to him, we have all this data. If we use, there are tools now we can use that help us, we can repurpose that data. We can see things in, patterns in the data. And that was not possible before technology. I think in the chat, there's a question. Oh, okay. So yes, technology is a critical element, but if we don't make sure, again, looking at it through the lens of education and equity, if we don't assure that everybody has access and training, then it just becomes more of a economic separator and a discriminator. So we have an obligation to really work on that. And I'm just going to go another route here, because that takes me to ed tech companies. And some of you have heard me talk about this. Ed tech companies are mostly designed by tech guys, and then they hire education people. And until ed tech guys have and engage in fuller conversation and inclusion, the people who are actually teaching, and if they're doing K-12, the teachers, who are women, we keep getting these technologies that, for those of us who are in the field, really experience as pretty inadequate. They have been designed for institutions to get the data they need and to track people and to do all of that, but they haven't been designed for the educator on the front line who has to do something every day. So just to say, that's another part of our task, is to hold ed tech companies, to account on being educationally inclusive of teachers.
Yeah, I even can generalize more and say that all these solutions where you can collect data in the background and analytics, they are rarely open to the beneficiaries, not only the teachers, they might be the parents also, and people like us who would be willing to check if the technology works or not. So this is something that I just came across when I was doing my research recently. So yes, it is something that even the big organizations, they share solutions, but we never know what is the reality of the use of these solutions. And this is something that is kind of, it's only for people in monitoring and evaluation and for internal reports, but never for the public. And it's a kind of lack of transparency that is not really working towards equity, as you were saying. So anyone else has a question? Because I have mine, and go ahead, Johan, please.
Thank you. Excuse the coughing. Dr. Woolis, I'm just, maybe this is an unfair question, but I'll ask it anyway. In many countries, we see that women are being denied access to education and more. My concern is, how do we trigger that, thing to show that it is important to provide women the education? If you were to change that mindset, are there any tricks there you can think of?
Yes.
Without us standing there on our high horses telling people what to do. That's not my intention. Yes.
I look at Iran. The women, people need to stand up and be heard. And the issue isn't that it isn't that people don't understand the power of education. It's that they do understand the power of education, and so they deny it to women. And so it's an issue of power, and we need to help our sisters in other places, but the form that will take in other countries is very particular to those countries. I don't have the solution, but I think it is really about it's about power and women, and then you're getting into issues of religion and fundamentalism, and then you're in a different, you're really in a different realm. So I would say there are people who are resistant to gender equity because they're less informed, or but willing to learn. But there is a real strand of people for whom the subjugation of women is central tenet to their life. And I don't think you ever change the minds of those people. I think you have to mobilize and be active and gain power. I mean, you have to find your power where it is and use it. And that's, I think about Iran, Afghanistan, how brave, this is a conversation we were having earlier, how brave these women need to be to do what they're doing. the ones who are standing up and standing in front of the schools and demanding education, they're completely aware of the power of education. That's why you deny it to people. It is a fundamental tenet of oppression to withhold learning, information, education. It's critical to containing and retaining your power, consolidating it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to come in here. I think there are other regimes or governments who are vicious enough to fakingly saying that they avail education to everyone, but then they empty education from its essence. And it's even worse because people think that they are educated, but they don't realize that it's not the quality education that they deserve, and the critical thinking and the freedom of thinking, not only expression, but at least thinking and being critical in their lives. And this is even worse.
Although you see, to just seconding that, let us not forget that the United States is also not that far in front in terms of women in education. You know, the women were excluded from all the elite institutions until the 70s, 60s. You know, this is, anyway, it's not just a problem of other countries.
So let me have my questions, because I see that we are near to the end of the hour. I will ask this question, and I think you will understand the background. But when you want to collaborate with people, how are you able to identify that these people are a good fit? Related to what you mentioned earlier about passion and pain, but where do you get this wisdom to see this person will do the job?
Oh, magic.
No, you have to give us the secret, because
for those who don't know, Ola is a mathematician. It's a logic question, and that's a very good question. What's your answer to that? I would love to hear everybody's answer to that. And I need to think on that, because for me, just to say, it's very intuitive. I feel it when I work with somebody. I could see, you know, that they share my passion, and they may be very difficult to work with. And we know some of those people. They're not us, of course. But we know that their passion will prevail. I don't know. Although, what do you think?
Do you gamble?
Do I gamble? No.
I don't know. It's a kind of this intuition, and I would like to learn how to. I think it's something that is maybe also more prevalent in the US than in other places. And since I live in Europe, I feel that this is really very, it's how the innovation and creativity in the US was always kind of a model for the whole world. Maybe things are changing now, but it is where we allow people to thrive, even if they don't initially have all the expected skills. While here in Europe, you need to fit in the framework. You should not go outside, me smaller than. So while in the US, I don't feel that it's the same thing. So do you agree?
I'm going to really think about this one. Sarah, what's your experience?
I think it's a combination of so many things. But like for us, at least here in the region, it's usually the who do you know and who can get you in that position. It's a bit challenging for us sometimes here to get into a place where you can actually do the work. And it's very hard sometimes for someone to be seen by others. There's this stress that you have to be like, you have to show the best of the best and not to believe in what you can do. Because they usually don't. They need you to be ready-handed, given to them, and do the job. But at the same time, when COVID started, I always give this example because I think it challenged me into thinking outside of this box. When COVID started, I was working with 12 teachers who know nothing about using a laptop. So they don't know how to turn it on. And so we were all under the stress that if we do nothing about working virtually, we will all lose our jobs and we'll all sit home and we'll be unpaid. And so there was a huge stress on me that I need to get everyone do what I can do. On PowerPoint, on Excel, on recording, and I'm like, and I'm sitting at home. We're scared of Corona. We don't know how to. They don't know how to use Zoom. I can't see them. They can't see me. What can I do? And then I had someone who said, like, we can do it, and I believe that you can do it, and I believe they will do it. And we all did it. And even though we ended up like I was working with people with mentalities that they don't want to learn, they did it. That they were able to change, and there was this something that they were able to give, just because the environment allowed it. And we never. I mean, it's not the criteria of like the person to fit, it's the criteria of also believing that the person will fit. And so like, if you believe in me that I would be able to do the job, and you show me and you give me that environment, and then I have this like safe space of actually giving, I would eventually give. Maybe it's not the case all the time, but I guess it plays the magic in itself. And so when you have someone who's believing in you, and that's why we feel sometimes, this is the right person in the right place. It's magic.
Yeah, I think that's the right person in the right place. I do think it's so interesting. I mean, you both said things that are really in my, I'm envisioning an environment. Sarah's talking about kind of this open, safe space where you have to get to because you're trying to solve a problem. You all have the same problem. And I think, Ulu, what you're focused on is when you're initiating something and you have to create these new relationships and new partnerships, and you're dealing with some very reliable actors and some less reliable actors and some malevolent actors. And how do you navigate through that? And I think you find the one person you trust and then the one person they trust. And I know you know how to do this because you've done it, but it's not easy. It's hard work. And I've had, some really unpleasant experiences. Because sometimes you have to the person you have to deal with is the person you trust the least. But you don't have a choice.
Yeah, I think this session would be called the collective wisdom of our community, because every one of you is bringing something very interesting. Thank you all for the great questions and also the great contributions. I see that we have Angela with us. Angela, do you hear us? So maybe there was a confusion with the hour for Angela. So we are almost at the end of the hour. I don't know if there are any other questions that you want to ask Diana. So if not, Diana, it's over to you to share the most important idea or that you are thinking about these days.
Yeah, it's about sustainable learning. It's really focused on theorizing and showing in practice the key elements of learning. But I think mostly I just want to thank you. It's been a great conversation. I had no idea where this was going to go. And I think we have a small group, but I think you have a different kind of conversation when you have a smaller group. So I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Related to this framework, it's maybe not the place here, but I would have an ask for you. Is the framework, the sustainable learning is really great, but we need to simplify the language so we can share it with everyone.
Yes, this is part of what I have to work on. Anybody who wants to volunteer to work with me on that, that's what I mean. It's like, I have to, it's in, yes, either have to simplify it or explain it more, which is what I'm hoping to do, is to make it a more practical. But I first had to figure out, I keep saying to people, it's like the genome. I first had to figure out, like, what are the pieces in my own mind and be confident about them. And that's taken a while.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back to you and ask more about what kinds of words or how to get there.
Yeah, we have also Giovanna who is volunteering, and it took me time to understand it, and now I see it everywhere. So
right. I know, it's one of those things. I will definitely, she's got to go. I'll be in touch. Ola will tell me how to find you.
In the COP, the Community of Practice.
Yes, we'll see you there.
Yeah, I'll maybe connect you on Slack, and then you will be able to have private messaging or even contribute. You can ask people for advice in the public channels.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can discuss this, and I can orient you where you can post your questions, and hopefully you will get answers from diverse members or expertise. Hopefully, thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all. I know I have to meet with Asim now. He's my next meeting.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll stop recording, and maybe you can stay on this Zoom. It's
Can we stay on the Zoom? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. Let me check if there's.
I've dropped the link in your email, Diana.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I'll get it. I'll use the link that he gave me.
Okay.
All right. Carry on.